Imagine you're the top cop of the town and you've been chasing the world's smartest kingpin for years, and when you find out who he is, it turns out to be your own brother-in-law. And that revelation will either make you look really stupid, or in the eyes of everyone else around you, it would look like you probably knew this whole time. And that's exactly what happened to Hank Schrader at the ending of Breaking Bad when he finally stumbled upon the undeniable proof that Walter White is indeed Heisenberg. Now granted, him using the bathroom in the master bedroom of his in-laws' house has always been something that I had a problem with personally, but that's a story for another day. But looking back on the series, you have to wonder how he didn't figure this out sooner. From abandoning evidence to near misses where Walter was almost caught red-handed, there were plenty of moments where Hank should have found out his brother-in-law's secret. And in this video, I'll be going over every time that Hank should have caught Walter in Breaking Bad. And before we get started, if you could leave a like on this video and hit that subscribe button to stay up to date with the latest content, I'd appreciate it. So, starting off in Season 1, Episode 6 titled Crazy Handful of Nothing. So we know in the pilot episode, Jesse introduced Walter to Crazy 8, who wanted to buy this high-grade meth, and when the deal went south, Walter cooked up a poisonous gas to knock out both Emilio and Crazy 8 inside the RV. But when a fire started from a throwaway cigarette, Walter strapped a mask on Jesse and himself in order to drive away from the fire and protect themselves from the gas. But after crashing into a nearby ditch, we see both Jesse and Walter casually throw the mask away in the desert, and it would never occur to them that this would leave a trail straight back to Walter. Because in Season 1, Episode 6, Gomez handed the same mask to Hank in a parking lot, and when it had came back from the lab, it was faint imprints that revealed that it was property of J.P. Wynn High School, the same school that Walter teaches at. And when getting a visit from Hank, he showed him the gas mask, and right off the bat, Walter looked extremely guilty. And when he asked for the school's inventory records, while they reviewed it together, Hank noticed that there were multiple items missing. And after learning about who had access to the supply closet, Hank's first thought was that a junkie had stolen the items. And Hank even mentioned it in a joke saying,
"We don't want people to start wondering about you, right?"
And at this point, Hank is not laughing, and Walter's wondering if he found out about his secret. But after a painfully long few seconds of silence, Hank burst out into laughter and patting Walter on the shoulder, having him realize that he was in the clear. And Walter even started to laugh too, just to ease the tension, because he is just relieved that Hank didn't know his secret. But when the next day rolls around, we see Hank return to the J.P. Wynn High School, and he would arrest the school janitor, Hugo. And we come to find out that the reason for this arrest is because Hugo had a minor drug possession record, a blunt in his car, and access to the chemistry lab keys, making him an easy scapegoat for the missing items. And this was the first time an innocent man suffered the consequences for Walter's actions. And it was even more devastating considering that when Walter was vomiting from the chemo in the bathroom, he was the one to clean it up. I mean, it was his job, but still. Now, in my opinion, Hugo's arrest was honestly a lazy conclusion, because the DEA had just discovered a gas mask linked to 99.1 pure meth, the purest that they had ever seen, so pure that even their own forensic chemist couldn't match it, and yet they pinned it on a janitor who smoked weed. But if Hank had just taken a small step back even for a moment and thought about it, the only logical suspect would have been Walter himself. I mean, after all, Hank did know his brother-in-law was a chemistry genius, and it really makes you think, if Walter wasn't family, would Hank have still ruled him out as a suspect? Now, our next piece of evidence comes during Season 2, Episode 2 titled Grilled, when Hank nearly catches Walter at Tuco's hideout. And just to do a quick recap, Tuco Salamanca kidnapped both Walter and Jesse and brought them to a shack out in the middle of the desert. And his plan was to haul Walter off to Mexico to cook meth for the cartel, and as far as Jesse goes, he really didn't have any plans for him.
But I can't just uproot my life like that.
Yeah, man. I mean, me neither.
Who's talking to you?
And after having them empty out their pockets, Walter took out his wallet along with his pill bottle, something that we never see him put back in his pocket. Just remember that for later. But with them desperate to save themselves, they try to poison Tuco with the ricin-infused meth. And when that plan fails, what comes next would be pure chaos, because Tuco drags Jesse outside and puts a gun to his head, and he was moments away from shooting him right then and there. But when Jesse fought back by hitting him in the head with a rock, he managed to shoot Tuco and would end up leaving him wounded in the sand. But when the sound of a vehicle approaching sent them into a panic, they assumed that it was Tuco's cousins, but instead it turned out to be Hank. And after an intense shootout between the two, Hank ultimately fired a shot that put the unstable Salamanca down permanently. And only a few yards away, Walter and Jesse watched the entire exchange completely frozen in fear. But when he recognized his brother-in-law, Walter took off running and never looked back. Now, in this situation, there's always the question of what if Hank had just arrived a few minutes earlier? He would have definitely caught Walter and Jesse with Tuco. But putting that to the side, there's the pill bottle that Walter left, and I know that's a reach, but still, we never see that one pill bottle again, so there's that. And also, above all else, you mean to tell me that after Hank put Tuco down, he wouldn't just do a quick scan of the area? Because when he was face to face with Tuco, he was clearly covered in blood already, meaning that he was recently attacked. So Hank, being the experienced cop that he is, should have seen Walter and Jesse running away from the area. Because I can't imagine that these two are exactly track stars. I mean, look at them. It's a cancer patient and a meth head. But instead, what we got was Hank standing over Tuco and just breathing a sigh of relief before hearing Hector's bell, and once again having Walter slip through the cracks completely unnoticed. Next up, we have Season 2, Episode 8, titled Better Call Saul, when Badger describes Heisenberg. Now, at this point, Hank finally has someone to put a face to the name of Heisenberg, and when Badger gets arrested, Hank grills him for a description of the infamous drug dealer. And the way he describes him, although it's not much of a unique description, he might as well have been talking about Walter, because, I mean, just listen for yourself.
Let's start with a name.
He just goes by Heisenberg.
How old is Heisenberg?
Old, like 50 or 70 or something.
Height?
Medium height, medium weight.
What color hair?
No hair. Dude's balder than you.
Now, I know Walter's not exactly on Hank's radar, but that description should have at least raised a few eyebrows. Well, that along with the gas mask from the first season. And to put another nail in the coffin, the next day, after the plan was set up to frame the fake Heisenberg, when Badger sits on the wrong bench, Walter shows up at the perfect moment to block Hank and the other agents just long enough for Jesse to swoop in and tell Badger to switch benches. And even after Hank watched the bus go down and they had their guy, something didn't sit right with him. And from the suspiciously close description and Walter showing up right as they're about to make the arrest, all these coincidences should have added up quickly in Hank's mind. And again, I have to ask the question, if Walter and Hank wasn't family, would he have been caught a lot sooner? Moving on to Season 3, Episode 1, titled No Mas. Now, I wasn't going to mention this one, but I know the comment section will never let it go, so let's talk about it. At the beginning of Season 3, Walter was preparing to leave the house after his marriage fell apart. And when Hank showed up to lend him a hand with some of his belongings, while packing their vehicles with boxes and bags, when they get down to the last of it, Hank grabbed the duffel bag with Walter's blood money right out of his hand, and immediately he noticed how heavy it was, and he said,
We got in there, cinder blocks.
And you would think that Walter would be just as terrified as he was with the mask situation in Season 1, but instead, without skipping a beat, he says,
$500,000 in cash.
And with that line, Hank burst into laughter and gave him a pat on the back. Because in his eyes, he thought that Walter was still depressed from the whole Skylar leaving him thing. And by thinking it was a joke, he seen that statement as Walter already looking at the bright side. But Walter, he didn't even crack a smile. And with there literally being $500,000 in that duffel bag and he didn't even try to lie about it, I mean, maybe, and this is just a theory, but maybe at that time, Walter kind of wanted to get caught, especially considering what he's been through, from watching Jane die to Skylar finding out the truth, and then there's him partially being to blame for the Wayfair plane crash. But what if, and I have a huge problem with this, but what if Hank had called Walter's bluff and unzipped the bag even as a joke? Yes, Breaking Bad could have ended right then and there, but what are the chances of anyone other than maybe a TSA agent going through your personal belongings? I just don't see it. I mean, yes, the bag was heavy, but then again, Walter's entire life is fitting in just a few boxes and a couple bags, so it would make sense that anything could be inside. I mean, if you put 16 books inside a duffel bag, it would probably be just as heavy. But for whatever reason, people think that it's just normal to go through someone's personal property from a joke that was told. All I'm saying is, if I ever do a meet and greet, I'm definitely keeping a lock on my stuff. Next up is Season 3, Episode 5, titled Mas, when Hank finds a lead on the RV. Now, Walter's luck nearly ran out at the midway point of the third season when a single RV door stood between Hank and uncovering his true identity. But how did we get here? Well, after tracking the blue meth to an RV that Jesse owned, Hank started staking out his house just waiting for him to slip up. And as hours passed, Marie suggested calling Walter for help as she still believed that Jesse once sold him weed. So when Hank called and casually asked if Pinkman ever had an RV, he explained that he was working on the case and he suspected that it was a rolling meth lab inside. And those words hit Walter to his core. And after the phone call, he rushed to the lot where the RV was kept with every intention of destroying it. But there was a problem. Badger. And with him being one of Jesse's most loyal friends, he called to let him know what Walter was gonna do. And without hesitation, Jesse grabbed the keys and he rushed over to the junkyard. But little did he know, Hank was following him every step of the way. And when he got there to confront Walter, after looking through the window, their worst fears would be as clear as day when they see Hank pulling in right behind the RV. And with Jesse and Walter still inside, Hank grabbed a crowbar and started to pry open the door. And when it looked like it was finally over for Heisenberg, the junkyard owner named Joe stepped in and said one of the most badass lines someone in his position can say.
You got a warrant?
And in response, Hank showed Joe the bullet holes in the RV door, saying that gave him probable cause to enter. But from the inside of the RV, Walter coached Jesse on what to say to get out of that situation, and he told Jesse to say this.
How could you have known they were there before you took off the tape?
And to double down and add insult to injury by sticking it to the man, Joe follows up and says,
That's right. Probable cause needs to be readily apparent.
This is my own private domicile and I will not be harassed, bitch!
And all Hank could do at that moment is laugh in defeat as Joe, Walter, and Jesse just outsmarted him. But it wasn't over yet, and Hank decided to give them exactly what they asked for, and as he walked back to his car, he called up his fellow agents to come with a warrant. And from there, it seemed that Hank had finally won, but Walter still had one last trick up his sleeve. And after calling Saul, he was able to stage a fake emergency call saying that Marie was in an accident. And the moment he heard his wife was in danger, he dropped everything and sped off. And by the time that he realized that it was a setup, the RV and all the evidence was gone. Now, in this current situation, Hank could have done a few different things to get through to the RV, such as maybe just ignoring Joe and just kept breaking into the RV, or simply just looking through the bullet holes to see Walter and Jesse inside. But I'm guessing that Hank was just too blinded by his obsession of catching Heisenberg to even consider taking another route, especially by being called out by Jesse and Joe.
Bitch!
And because of this obsession, once again, Walter slipped through the cracks. Our next entry of evidence comes in Season 4, Episode 4, titled Bullet Points, where Hank stopped doing his police work to focus on his rock collection. But when a colleague handed him a mysterious case, his curiosity did get the better of him. A random chemist that was shot dead in his apartment seemingly for no reason? I mean, it seems like something that would be right up his alley. And after reviewing the case himself, he came to the conclusion that this man is the person that he's been searching for, the infamous Heisenberg. And when Walter came over for dinner, Hank couldn't wait to share his new case. But instead of going over specifics, he handed Walter a DVD, and when he played it, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Gale Boetticher, the man he had ordered Jesse to kill, and on screen he was just singing karaoke and dancing. And as Walter Jr. and Hank are laughing at this goofy performance, Walter could barely keep his hands from shaking. But after dinner, Hank showed Walter something far more incriminating, Gale's lab notes. And inside, this book was filled with chemical formulas and meticulous details about the blue meth operation. And the thing that stood out the most was the dedication on the front. And I'll let Hank take this one.
To WW, my star, my perfect silence.
And after throwing out all the WW names that he could think of, just for a moment, Hank almost wondered if it was meant for Walter himself. And how does Walter respond to this accusation? Well, he does what he always does when he's confronted. He bluffs his way out of it. And with a slight chuckle, he throws his hands up and he basically admits to it.
You got me.
But before Hank can think twice about it, Walter redirects the conversation and suggests that WW stood for Walt Whitman, Gale's favorite poet, and even reading a quote from one of his books.
And from time to time looked up in perfect silence at the stars.
Now, although his lab notes wasn't exactly dedicated to Walter himself, his reaction should have made Hank think a little bit more about this coincidence, especially after all the evidence that Walter sprinkled throughout the series. But instead, because Walter's one of the biggest eggheads that he knows, he just took his word for it and brushed it off, completely unaware that Heisenberg was sitting right in front of him. The next close call that Walter had might have been the closest one yet, and he proved how far he would go to really protect himself, bringing us to Season 4, Episode 11. And in this episode, we see Hank being chauffeured around by Walter to track down his newest suspect, Gustavo Fring. And after putting a GPS tracker on his car and staking out the chicken farm, he comes up empty-handed both times. So during this ride along, Hank decides to switch things up and go to a new place, a laundromat that Gus owns. But he doesn't outright say it to Walter. He only calls out directions until they get there. And when Hank tells him to take a different turn, Walter starts to panic as he notices that they're en route to the laundromat/meth lab. And as they get closer, Hank starts to reveal his suspicions, and he explains that the same company, Madrigal Electromotive, owned part of Gus's chicken joints and the laundromat. And from his research, he found out that a high industrial air filter had been delivered there and it was signed for by Gale Boetticher. And Walter knows that Hank is right on track, and if he were to go inside, it would be over for everybody. And he knew that he had to do something to stop it. So as they approached the entrance, Hank told him to pull in, but in an attempt to stall, he purposely missed the turn to the laundromat. And this mistake did frustrate Hank, but he just told Walter to do a U-turn. But Walter knew that he couldn't bring Hank to the same place where he cooks meth at and still be on good terms with Gus. So with only one chance to make a diversion, Walter purposely made a hard turn into oncoming traffic and caused a car accident. And yes, this definitely bought him more time, but at the cost of putting himself back on Gus's chopping block and even losing the respect of his own family. And we have to remember that Walter practically begged to be Hank's personal driver to spy on Gus.
Well, I would just really
Love to be the one to be able to take you there, and I mean, I've just.
And Hank's trust in Walter came back to bite him in more ways than one. But imagine if he had Steve Gomez to bring him to the laundromat. It's a good chance that he would have found the evidence he needed to crack the case. Or he would have probably gotten himself killed a lot faster because, like Jesse said,
Think a dude like Gus would let your boy anywhere near him? He'll break out his box cutter on his sorry gimp ass.
Now the last narrow escape for Walter took place in Season 5, Episode 5, titled Dead Freight, when Walter used Hank to confirm whether Lydia was lying about the DEA tracker on the methylamine supply. And his plan was to visit Hank and pretend to be upset about his failing marriage and play on Hank's sympathy. And when Walter broke down right in front of him saying that Skyler no longer loved him and he didn't know what to do, this made Hank visibly uncomfortable and he excused himself to get them coffee. And usually, Walter takes his coffee black, but this time, he asked for cream and sugar to buy himself more time. Because the moment Hank left the room, Walter moved quickly to plant a transmitter in Hank's computer and a hidden bug inside the picture frame on his desk. And just as he finished, the door cracks open. And not having enough time to put the frame back together, Walter held it pretending to admire Hank and Marie's happy relationship. But now, with that bug in place, Walter had ears inside the DEA and once again outsmarting Hank. But what if Hank just walked in a few seconds earlier or even came back just to clarify how he likes his coffee? He would have definitely caught Walter red-handed tampering with DEA property and he would have had a lot of explaining to do. But only 2 episodes later, he did eventually find out the truth. And because he did, he would later on pay with his life for that discovery. And I'm sure that even in his final moments, he was probably thinking to himself, how didn't I realize this sooner? But if he did, you think he would have still suffered the same fate?